Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel, and today we are talking about DRX and the roster changes that they made 2 days ago. So DRX is a team that is in the VCT Pacific League, and it's a team that has had high expectations in the past and hasn't been able to reach them. And it was a prediction of many people, myself included, that when they had a mediocre performance at Champions 2023, that in the offseason we would see some roster changes. And at first it didn't seem like they were going to make any, because they didn't. And all of a sudden we are 2 months out of the season, and they decide that this is the time. My current theory for this is they wanted to know what their replacement was going to be for the two players that they dropped in RB and Zest. And they decided to sign the player Flashback, who had been playing with them in off-season events, and they moved Foxy9 to the active roster, while Stax, Buzz, and Mako all stay on the team. And I do think that if you were going to make any changes to the team, RB and Zest are definitely the easiest targets because Stax, Buzz, and Mako are all fantastic players. Stax is your star IGL. He's proven to be a very effective IGL at the tier 1 level. Hasn't been able to get as much out of his team as he maybe would have liked, but he is on the team and he will get more chances. While Buzz is the explosive jet duelist player who can frag out and be very dominant on the battlefield, and Mako is your star smokes player who's been very effective for you. So I do agree that if you're going to make any changes, Zest and RB are the ones that seem like the most expendable, but we will do a deeper dive into that. One thing I do want to talk about first, though, is the fact that all three coaches are remaining. Termi, Glow, and Argency all remain as coaches. They have been with this team since this team was known as Vision Strikers. Now, coaching in the VCT is one of those things that can either be seen as something that is very important and integral to a team's success, or it can be seen as something that isn't really that important because players are ultimately the ones that are getting it done. So as long as you have really good players, you don't necessarily need super stellar coaching. And that is a mindset that is kind of seen throughout regular sports as well, where, there will be teams that maybe have kind of lower expectations, but a really good coach can make them reach really big heights and can get more out of those players than otherwise would be had. Or you can have a mediocre coach on a really good team and the team just ends up getting done because they have very fantastic players. It's a situational kind of thing. I do think that DRX's coaches, they have been good, and the results do show that they are a strong team, and they've been a strong team for a while now. But I do think that this roster definitely has a problem with coming up in the big moments, with being able to push through adversity. It's kind of a problem that I've seen in other teams as well, where when we get to these big moments, teams can tend to crumble, and DRX is definitely one of those teams. So would a coaching change have been a better idea for DRX? We won't really know at this point, but we'll see how long these coaches stay on the team. I would imagine that if this roster continues to have mediocre results, that we will definitely see a coaching change. And even if they end up having good results but not win a championship, I can definitely see the coaches not being there next year, but their jobs are probably safe for now. Now we're going to be looking at the 2023 stats for all of these players that played in the VCT last year on this roster. Flashback does not have any tier 1 experience, so his stats are not on the board. So let's get into it, starting with the IGL in stacks. He had 933 kills, 167 deaths, 648 assists for a KD ratio of 0.87. He played Harbor, KO, Breach, Sky, and Fade. So a lot of those characters are not characters that you're expecting a ton of kills out of, but the fact that his KD ratio is 0.87, definitely that's a pretty average range for IGLs, I would say. Again, you're not looking for IGLs to be the guys fragging out, but these are decent stats when you just look at the baseline stats. But Stax, his value comes from being IGL. It's the same kind of situation as FNS, where last year he didn't get a ton of kills. He was very consistently at the lower of the leaderboard, but his value comes from being a really good strategist and a really good in-game leader. Then we move on to Buzz, who unsurprisingly has the most kills out of any player that played on this roster last year. 1,164 kills, 1,056 deaths, 335 assists for a KD ratio of 1.10. He played Jet and Raze as his mains, and lesser so he played some Killjoy and KO here and there. Buzz is an explosive player. He's very solid. When he's going, he can look like one of the best players in the world. This player definitely deserves a championship, and I really think he wants one. And I think this is a very important year for those 3 players that stayed on this roster and didn't get cut, because they're going to have to show that they can be top players in the world at the roles that they play. Moving on to Mako, he had 1,077 kills, 969 deaths, 778 assists for a KD ratio of 1.11. That is the best KD ratio on the board. He played Viper, Omen, Astra, and Brimstone. Unsurprisingly, he was the smokes player, and he's been a very good smokes player for an entire time. Is there more there potentially on other roles? Maybe, and maybe that's something that they try with a new system. But I do think Mako most likely is going to stay in those smoke roles. He's been effective on it, but can he be that really top smokes player that can bring a championship, or that can help bring a championship to a team? Hasn't happened yet. I do think he's capable of it, and his stats as a smokes player for his kill death ratio and the amount of kills that he has, that's very impressive numbers for a role that typically doesn't get a ton of kills. Moving on to the players that were cut, we have RB first off, 1,001 kills, 1,002 deaths, 407 assists for a KD ratio of 0.99. In terms of characters that he played quite a bit. He played Killjoy, Astra, KO, Harbor, Fade, Neon, and Yoru. Interestingly enough, he actually did top the team in kills at Champions, and while that is impressive for RB, I think that maybe just shows that that team was really struggling during that tournament, because he definitely should not be the leader in kills. RB, I think what you're losing when you cut him is a player that is definitely versatile. His stats are pretty decent. A 0.99 KD ratio is solid, and he was playing flex, playing a lot of different roles on this team. He could play smokes, he could play sentinel, he can play duelist. He's a decent player, and I think that might be a mistake dropping him. I do think he's very capable at that flex role. Maybe you want something more out of them, but flex is an interesting position to try to fill. While flex players maybe don't specialize in specific characters as much as other roles on the team, it's a very important role, and you have to have a player that can be versatile and can play a lot of different roles. And RB, I think, did show that. I don't know if he was the best option, but he did show that he could be very good at it at a tier 1 level. Unfortunately, the team did not see it that way. And I do think out of him and Zest, he was definitely the more valuable player, but ultimately it is a role that I can see them replacing semi-easily. And maybe they're going to do it from within, because Foxy9 is generally a player that plays Jet and Raze, but as we already talked about, Buzz is generally in that role, so I guess they're going to try Foxy9 on flex, or maybe they're going to move Buzz to a different role. It's yet to be seen exactly what happens during the season. I know they've been trying out different things during the offseason, but we'll see how consistent their roles are during the actual VCT season. But moving on to the stats of Zest, he had 641 kills, 685 deaths, 315 assists for a KD ratio of 0.93. That is the lowest on the team. He didn't play as many maps as most of the other players. He actually played less than Foxy9 during, I believe, the regular season stage of the Pacific League, but he did end up having more of a permanent spot during the international tournaments. He played Sova, Fade, KO, Harbor, Brim, Viper. So he also played a variety of roles during the season, but I think the numbers show that he maybe couldn't find anything that was super effective for him. And it does kind of surprise me that he was playing more than Foxy9 during the international tournaments, because I do think Foxy9, the stats show that he's a better player, but I think the issue was Foxy9 couldn't fill the same roles that Zest could. So it is interesting that they're now, I guess, going back on that decision and having Foxy9, I guess, essentially stepping into, I guess, the role that either RB or Zest is playing. So it is interesting to me that Foxy9 is this team's solution, but maybe they're just already familiar with the player, and maybe that helped in their decision. But it does leave me questions as to what roles these players are going to be playing. Moving on to Foxy9's stats, he had 429 kills, 404 deaths, 94 assists for a KD ratio of 1.06. He played Jet and Raze during the season. When he did play, he played less than all of these players. He's a solid player. He's a solid duelist guy. Again, I just question what the role is going to be for him on this team. I do think he can be effective, but I think Buzz is definitely the better Jet and Raze player. I mean, I do think Buzz is talented enough to switch to another role. In the Red Bull Home Grand Tournament, you had Foxy9 playing Killjoy and KO, and it doesn't look like he did fantastic on it, but maybe they're going to try to train him more on that role. I guess they're going to try to mold him into the flex player. I think that's probably what they're thinking, but I don't really know if that's going to end up working or not. Flashback does play Viper and Killjoy, so he can play Smoked and he can play that Sentinel role. So maybe Flashback can be trained for the flex role, and then Foxy9 can end up focusing more on duelist and maybe being a second duelist player. They're also going to have to sign an extra man for the season, so we'll see who they pick up there, if anybody. Some teams just run with no extras, but the Pacific teams do tend to make roster changes within matches, so maybe they brain on a player who's a bit more versatile and is comfortable with being on the bench and being able to jump in when he's needed. So looking at this team's results since this roster was picked up by DRX, previously they were Vision Strikers. In 2022, they came into Iceland Reykjavik with the mission and they performed pretty well, but they do end up getting 5th to 6th. So a decent result, and it definitely showed progress from where they were before as Vision Strikers. Copenhagen, unfortunately, no progression there. It's the same exact result with the 5th to 6th placement. And then Champions 2022, this is where this roster looks really good and looks like they could potentially be championship contenders. They placed 3rd, they lost to Optic, barely missing out on the grand finals, and unfortunately, that is one of the best placements that they've had over the past 2 years. Technically their best, but in 2023, in the lock-in tournament, the first tournament of the VCT franchise league, they placed pretty much the exact same spot in 3rd to 4th. Again, barely missing out on grand finals. They had a good showing that tournament, but it just did not result in a tournament win. They did not take home an international trophy. In the Pacific, so this is the regular season that they had and then the tournament that they had to qualify for Masters Tokyo, they placed 2nd. They were top of the Pacific League going into playoffs, and they did go on a nice run, but then they lost in grand finals, and then they got the 2nd spot, and it was another frustrating loss from this team because it looked like they should have won, and then they just didn't. And then they go into Tokyo and have a very disappointing performance at 7th to 8th. They did not look locked in. They did not look like the same team that we saw get 3rd in Champions and 3rd in lock-in. They looked like a team that didn't really care, that wasn't really trying that hard. They were inconsistent. There were maps that they should have won that they didn't, and they just looked kind of lost out there. And then in Champions 2023, same kind of thing. They don't look like a team that's really ready to win a championship, and they end up placing 5th to 6th. These are disappointing results, especially in the 2 biggest tournaments of the year. They had a really good showing in the first tournament of the year, and it looked like, hey, DRX are going to be contenders throughout this entire year. And technically they were, but they just couldn't get it done during the 2 big tournaments after that. So this is where I started to think, yeah, they're probably going to make roster changes, and it took them a while to do, but they did eventually do it. This roster has been together for a long time. They've had the DRX label for 2 years now. They were Vision Strikers before that. They've had the same coaches. They've had the same players. Something did need to change because clearly the mix that they've had has not been working. I do think that a coaching change could be effective. I do think that the coaches on this team have been good coaches, but eventually you have to make a change just to switch things up. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad coaches. It just means that maybe it's time to get a new voice in this room, to get a new perspective and get more out of this team because they need to win. They need to win a championship. And if they don't, I don't see Stacks, Buzz, and Mako or the coaches staying together for very much longer. I do hope that they pull through. I really want a Pacific team to win a tournament this year. We have not had a team that is from any Asian region win an international tournament in the VCT. DRX has looked like a team that has been able to do it, that's been capable. They have not done it so far. It looks like PaperX has kind of passed them as the front runner to win a world championship. They got very close this year. There's a lot to talk about this team as to the roles they're playing, as to the roster they have, the coaching staff, the results that they've had. Is this team still a contender? Are they better off? I don't really know. And I kind of think they're going to be a bit worse than they were in 2023. I don't think they're going to have as strong as a regular season. I don't know if I see them winning the kickoff tournament. There are a lot of really good teams in the Pacific, and there's going to be quite the gauntlet to go through to be able to top that league. PaperX is still going to be very good. Bleed's coming in. They look really strong. Global should improve. There's some really good teams in that league. I think DRX still has the talent to be one of the top teams. and I don't expect them to not qualify for any international tournament, but winning one, I don't know if Flashback and Foxy9 being consistent players on this team makes them a contender. I just don't. Their core three in Stacks, Buzz, and Mako, I do think those three players are capable of winning championship, but you need your fourth and fifth player to also be top tier, and I don't know if Foxy9 and Flashback are the answers to that problem, but we will see. I do hope I'm wrong. Anyways, thank you guys very much for watching. Let me know in the comments down below if you think these roster changes are a good idea or not. Do you think they're going to be a contender again, or do you think they're going to crash and burn? Thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.